everybody, and welcome to Limited Level Ups. I'm Alex, and this week on the podcast, we're saying goodbye to March of the Machine. I feel like almost too soon. It feels like we haven't had this format for that long, but new format is on the horizon. This is going to be our last Mom episode, so we're going to send it off with a bang here with an episode called Lessons Learned for March of the Machine. And I've done these kind of Lessons Learned episodes before for other formats. It's been a while since we've actually done one, but I felt like this was a format that had a lot going on. It was a pretty complex format that, I feel like there's things that you can take away to future formats, and that's what we're going to try to do today. Extract some of the things that Mom taught us so that we can be better at future formats. We're going to approach this Lessons Learned episode a little bit different than previous Lessons Learned episodes if you've listened to those before. So before, I would basically give you my own lessons learned. I go like, here's what I thought was important out of the format. Here are little tidbits that I picked up. But the thing is, everybody learns at a different rate. Everybody has their own takeaways, their own things that they have learned from formats. And I would give you, kind of speculation of what I thought you might find helpful. But for today's episode, I've actually reached out to the community, my Twitter followers, and the Limited Level Ups Discord. I basically said, hey, what did you learn from this format? And that's going to be the main focus of today's episode. Not just what I learned from the format, although I'm going to share my opinions on the format, some thoughts on the mechanics. I think it's going to be fun to talk about that. But I do want to put a large focus on pulling from everybody's experiences. And hopefully some of those experiences are going to resonate with you. I think it's a better way of doing it than just me speculating and guessing what might be helpful for you. And just quickly before we jump in, I'm going to call it Patreon. Patreon.com/limitedlevelups. So you can go check that out if you're enjoying the show, feel like you learned something, feel like you've, won a few more drafts here and there. There's a bunch of reward tiers over there that all are geared towards getting you better at Limited Magic. So go check that out if you want to support the show. And of course, go check it out if you want to level up your game, get to the next level. It's really helpful at the beginning of a format like we're going to have in a week or two to be in that Limited Levels Discord, to get access to the secret channels in there that patrons get access to. You can get deck tech help, you can get draft log review help, all the good stuff, gets you jump started on the new format so you can start winning more. All right, let's jump in. So before we get to our community submitted level ups, kind of the meat of this show, I did want to give a little bit of commentary on the set, a little bit of some thoughts on the mechanics, some of the things the mechanics taught us gameplay-wise, and just, some broad takeaways from the set in general that I do think you can apply to future sets. So, first and foremost, I thought this format was awesome. And I think most formats are awesome. It really takes a kind of real stinker for me to be like, yeah, that one wasn't so good. But even a month and a half in, I'm still really excited when I fire up the stream. It's like, yeah, let's draft this set. And some sets I'm just like, yeah, okay, I like this set. I'll draft it today. I'm gonna have fun, gonna hang out with some people. But this one, I'm like, I really just want to open a pack and see what's in it. And if I were to describe this set in one word and why I think it is so great, it's replayable. Part of that replayability is there, a good spread of playable archetypes, and within those archetypes, there was kind of sub-archetypes. You could have blue-white knights, you could have blue-white more controlling with Wrath and casting some spells. But I think really what made this set so replayable is the diversity of cards. We had more cards in this set than in most sets, and that's mostly because of the bonus sheet, right? The bonus sheet added, 60 cards or something? And that really made it feel like you weren't just playing with the same cards over and over again. And it also opened up the opportunity for some kind of niche strategies, right? For example, we have Rayav, Master Smith, which is the red-white 2/2, that whenever a equipped or enchanted creature attacks, that thing gains double strike. That was a legitimately good payoff for doing something that the color combination wasn't necessarily doing, right? Red-white was backup, caring about backup, or just generically being an aggro deck. But when you had Rayav, you would really prioritize a Beamtown Beepstick. I mean, maybe you play that card anyways, but a Core Halberd, and that's not a card you necessarily really want to pick up. And I think any card, and there were, it wasn't just Rayav, there's a lot of cards like this. Any card that can make you change your pick orders and not just go, okay, this is the best card in the pack, let's take it. This is the best card in the pack in my colors, let's take it. That leads to a lot more of a complex format, of a diverse format. And Mom was full of that kind of stuff. I really felt like every single draft, I was just talking about the difference between blue-white knights and blue-white maybe controlling. On stream yesterday, I drafted blue-white twice in a row, but very, very different decks. My blue-white knight deck had, just your marshals and your 4-drops that push damage, like your Protocol Knights and your Bullet Slinger. And then I drafted this blue-white control deck with Elishnorn, and I wanted completely different cards, right? So that not only is just cool because you get to draft different decks, but it really does push you to think, okay, what does my deck want? Not just, what's the best card in the pack. It really asks you, okay, how is my deck going to function? And I think that adds just so much replayability to the format. And speaking to diversity of the format, I think something that was really cool and was kind of underappreciated, I didn't hear many people talking about this, but we had more uncommons in drafting this set. We had access to more uncommons than we normally do because of the Multiverse Legends cheat and because of, battles had their own slot that was an additional uncommon. And so once again, that's just more packs that look different from other packs. And so drafts just felt different. And I think maybe this is just personal opinion and maybe not everybody would prefer this, but I actually think it'd be really cool if going forward, they had more opportunities to add a 4th uncommon into packs. Like, I really thought it was cool that we had packs that had 5 uncommons. Really, again, adds to that diversity. Even, ups the power level a little bit, I suppose, but it wasn't like all the uncommons were just like bangers, just like way better than the commons. The commons competed too. It really is just about seeing a bunch of different cards. So, I would not be opposed to just going forward, they're just like, yeah, we're gonna have 4 uncommons in packs instead of 3. I think that would actually be really, really cool. And of course, battles themselves, that was kind of a new puzzle to solve. I'm gonna touch on those a little bit later. But that would just added to kind of the excitement of the format and the exploration phase of the format. And that was another thing I think that really contributed to the longevity. I feel like the exploration phase of the format, where you're really kind of understanding what's good in this format, was slightly longer than it would be in some other formats. And part of that was the format evolved and developed, right? It wasn't just like, week 1 of the format, Blue-Black was great, but actually, if you look at the data, Blue-Black is one of the lesser performing decks these days. It's actually really fallen off, so you really saw a lot of format development, a lot of churn, and that's another thing that just really makes a good format, where it's not just straight the same from beginning to end. When I think of the great formats, Kaldheim, Strixhaven, they all had a little bit of that going on, or it's just like, hey, now people know this is good. Now you gotta adjust your pick orders a little bit. You gotta adjust what cards you're willing to play. And again, this leads to drafts where they're gonna be different from your week 1 drafts, and that's really cool to me. Now, for all the great things I can say about the format, doesn't mean there weren't a few blemishes that I could definitely see people criticizing. I think you could definitely tune blue down a little bit, make it a little bit less good. Tune red up a little bit. I think giving red a good 2-drop would go a long way. Red didn't really have a great common 2-drop. So color balance was a little bit off, but I think it wasn't so much that it was like, oh man, like that's really impacting my enjoyment of this format. There's also the issue of the rares, but I think by the end of the format, there's definitely a lot of formats, like Crimson Vow is back on Flashbacks on Arena right now, and that was a format from the start to the end. People were like, yeah, the bombs are just killer. It's really, really difficult to have a strategy that accounts for, just playing against a bomb every single game, because all those bombs were, you must kill right now or else you just die. Yes, the rares were good in this set, and yes, there were the Atalis and the Glissas and the Sunfalls and the Breach of the Multiverses. There were a few standouts where just like, okay, they are ridiculous. But I think for the most part, there's cards like Thalia and the Gitrog monster. Your opponent plays that, and you're not just like, well, now I can't win. You just go, all right, I Final Flourish, I maybe have to sacrifice something, but the game goes on. I think most of the rares fell into that camp of, I want to draft this card, it's going to affect the game, but your opponent's it's not just game over for them when they play it. And that brings me to the topic of the removal, and I think this set probably has had the best common removal we've seen in a very long time, between Afara's Dispersal and Deadly Derision and Volcanic Spite and Final Flourish. There's so much good interaction, making those bombs feel a little bit less impactful. You could actually argue that the interaction was a little bit too good. Like, if I'm to tune things, if you made Afara's Dispersal cost 1 less when the creature was attacking, that means the aggressive decks were, not as hampered as they were. But for the most part, I think that counterplay between the good interaction and powerful cards at rare, and mind you, it's good to have good cards at rare. You don't want to have a set like Dominaria United, where one of the problems with that set was, for as much as I could say good things about it, and a lot of people did like that set, a lot of times you open your pack and you're just like, well, that's a land, or, well, that's a weird commander card. There was not a lot of misses in the rare slot. You were generally pretty excited to open your pack and take a rare, and I think that's a good feeling. And so, you have to counterbalance a bunch of good rares with a bunch of good removal, and I think they did that pretty well. So as much as, I'm nitpicking a little bit here, I do think, all in all, there was good counterplay between the good cards and the good interaction spells. All right, that's my opinion piece out of the way. Let's move into some more kind of objective stuff. The mechanics. There's 5 main mechanics in the set. Battles being the big one, the big headliner. Convoke, Backup, Incubate, and I'm putting the kind of flip Phyrexians as their own mechanic. Let's talk about battles first, because they were the headliner of the set. So I think for a first outing on a new card type, they undershot a little bit. I think they would ideally have made the battles across the board a little bit better, and then maybe made, Invasion of Om get a little bit worse. But I think it's a good thing, to be honest, with a new card type. They've been really careful with these battles. You can tell in the past when they've come out with new card types like Equipment, they've overshot and it kind of caused some problems. stuff like Skull Clamp, Umezawa's Jitte, with Planeswalkers, Jace the Mind Sculptor was one of the first Planeswalkers that had to get banned in Standard. With vehicles, there was, Smuggler's Copter was too good. So I think when they were designing battles, they were like, all right, this is a new card type. We want to make them exciting, make them cool, but we also don't want to make them problematic. And I think it's a good thing. I think if all of the battles, if there was one card in each pack that was as powerful as Invasion of Amonkhet, the format would not be very fun. When your opponent casts Invasion of Amonkhet, you're like, all right, that's what this game's going to be about. You don't want that to happen every single game. Now, where they undershot generally is with the aggressive battles. Stuff like Invasion of Kylum, the red-white battle, or Invasion of Moog, the green-white battle, or just like the white battles in general, the ones you want to attack you want to put in your aggro deck ostensibly. I think they were very worried about battles being too snowbally in the aggressive deck, so they gave the aggressive battles, the red, white, green battles, an extra point of defense a lot of the time. Or maybe they made the front side a little bit worse than some of the slower battles. And they're going to tune that going forward, I'm sure. I don't think that it's like, oh, battles are just bad in aggressive decks and it's unassailable and that's just an inherent quality of them. No, like, you've got stuff like Invasion of Gobakon at rare, which is the 1 and a white, 3 defense battle that you look at your opponent's hand, you make one of their spells cost 2 more, and then the backside is Light Shield Array, the enchantment that pumps your team, pumps all the stuff that you've attacked with. That card's really good, and that's a good aggressive battle. It's even playing constructed because it's so good. There is somewhat of an inherent problem of like, okay, well, you can't afford to attack the battle as the aggressive deck. You need to attack the opponent's face, but it's not an unassailable problem. They can clearly make a card that is enticing enough for the aggressive decks. It just so happens that, again, they undershot, they were being careful. A card evaluation thing going forward for the battles, and this is something that I think a lot of people thought of, and this is a good way to evaluate cards generally, but what are you getting on the front side? What are you getting with no work, without flipping it? And I think that lesson is no clearer than with the card Invasion of Kamigawa. This is the 3 and a blue, 4 defense battle, that when it enters the battlefield, you tap target artifact or creature. I didn't even know it said artifact. That's kind of funny. I played with this card so little. But tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Well, this card was really, really bad. In fact, it was the absolute worst battle in the set, in my mind. From just pure power level, how much do you want to put this card in your deck? And it tricked a lot of people, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, you tap your thing down, you get the backside, it's a 2-3 flyer, which, it was a 2-3 flyer that hits them, draw a card, seems pretty good. Problem with this battle is you're paying 4 mana for tap a creature, it doesn't untap for 1 turn. That's a horrendous rate, right? A lot of the battles that were kind of like, iffy, at least the front sides were okay. Invasion of Moog, the one that puts counters and things, okay, that's like an okay 4 mana, put counters on all your creatures. It's a little bit overcosted, but it's not by a ton. This effect should cost like 1 or 2 mana, right? And the backside is also not particularly exciting too. So when you're evaluating battles going forward, I would just say really ask what the front side gives you. And sometimes, the front side is not that exciting, but the back side is excellent. I do think that it's a large part of how good the card is, though. What are you getting for the front side, Ray? That's a good way to evaluate the battles going forward. From a gameplay perspective, I think battles forced you to think about combat in the way you should. It actually taught you to think multiple turns ahead in the way that I think good players think about their combats and think about their turns. You really had to think, okay, how many things do I need to leave back here to make sure they can't flip their Invasion of Amonkhet? Or how do I, plan out my next turn where I can maybe entice them into attacking me back, and then I cast my battle, and then I can get a clean hit in. You're basically thinking, how are my next 3 turns going to play out? How is combat going to look in my next 2 or 3 turns? And that's a skill that is very important for being good at limited magic, I think. And it's a skill that battles, again, forced you to be good at. Or at very least, it forced you to think about it. And a lot of players, I think, wouldn't naturally be forced to think about that kind of stuff. But you can take that kind of mindset that you had of like, oh, how many things do I need to leave back? How many things should I attack with? Can I entice my opponent into doing something funny so I can leverage a combat trick? That's the kind of thinking that every single set you should be thinking about in combat and planning out your turns. One of the things that battles helped me do, actually, personally, a little level up I had, was honing the skill of not getting tunnel visioned. Because a lot of the time, your opponent would play, a decent battle. Maybe it's not Invasion of Amonkhet level, but it is something that you're like, all right, I don't really want them to get that backside of it. And you'd be really focused on protecting the battle, leaving stuff back. Maybe planning to use a removal spell in combat so that they can't flip the battle on the turn they are expecting to. But as I played more and more, I realized, hold on, wait a second. I'm so tunnel visioned on not letting them flip this battle. What if I just instead use my removal spell to kill the flip backside of the battle? Isn't that just so much better? Because then they have a bunch of tap creatures. I don't have to trade off, and I deal with the issue that I was worried about in the first place instead of having to just stem the bleeding, kill our thing, and then kill the thing that was attacking the battle, and then next turn I have to deal with it again. So it really forced you to zoom out a little bit and say, what really matters in this game? Does it matter that they flip their battle? I mean, again, if the Invasion of Amonkhet, I probably did. They probably got a pretty good ETB. But if it was something a little more meek, it's like, okay, you know what? I'll just spend my removal spell. Their creatures are all tapped. I can crack them back, and that's a big swing in the game, right? So that's a lesson I think you can apply, again, not just to battles, but zoom out whenever you're in a tricky situation and go, all right, what actually matters here? How is this game and this turn going to pan out if X happens? And that's, again, it trains you to have that kind of thinking that you can apply to a lot of different situations. All right, let's move into my favorite mechanic of the set, Convoke. And I just think Convoke is awesome. I think it's an all-timer limited mechanic. You know, there's a reason we've seen it 3-4 times at this point. I think it's really cool because it's an explosive mechanic. You really feel this, you know, it's almost like storming off in Vintage Cube. Not, of course, not to that degree, but you feel like, oh, I'm like really going off, casting my Rouse Reinforcements and then casting something else. It's explosive, but not in the way where it's just like, I dump my whole hand on the board and I attack my opponent for 1,000,000 and you're just dead. You're giving up damage in the process, right? If you want to tap your creatures for Convoking. So yes, you get to play out things more efficiently, but your opponent, you know, you give your opponent a little bit of life. I think that dynamic is really cool. Just like I think battles highlighted some core concepts of how you should be thinking about your games, I think that Convoke highlighted for a lot of players how important double spelling is in a game of Limited. You know, there's the whole thing of the person who spends the most mana in a game of Magic is often going to be an advantage, and I think Convoke is a really great example of that. You being able to turn your creatures into mana dorks is really cool. It really asked you to, once again, just like with battles, how am I going to plan out this turn? Do I care about getting that 3 points here? Or do I want to be able to cast my Hello Hopper? You know, it really made these cool turns where on turn 4, you played your Knight of the New Coalition, made 2 tokens, cast your Halo Hopper, or pass the turn, cast Meteor of the Minds. Once again, we see the concept again highlighted of planning out your turns a turn or two in advance, or at very least, planning out a singular turn, and not just going through the motions of, oh, I tap, I draw, I go to attacks. You really, when you have some Convoke cards in hand, you know, the wheels start spinning. You're like, all right, how do I want to plan this out? And I think it's good gameplay. And again, it really trains you. You should be doing that every single turn of the game. You shouldn't just be like, all right, draw my card, go to attacks. You should be taking your draw step, looking at your cards, figuring out what you want to do with them. Do you want to attack? Do you want to block? Do you want to cast a removal spell pre-combat or on your opponent's turn? And Convoke pushes you to do that a little bit. So yeah, I think those are some of the lessons that Convoke can really teach you. And another thing about Convoke in this set in particular that really we hadn't really seen in the last few times that we had Convoke, but how powerful instant speed Convoking is, especially for decks that, you know, we're a little bit more defensive, because not having to tap your creatures at sorcery speed, being able to sit back on your Meeting of Minds and your Artistic Refusal. Man, did that feel awesome. Just, you know, Artistic Refusal, it's probably my favorite card in the whole set for Limited. Just that warm, fuzzy feeling of being like, oof, you know, I've got this refusal, I'm just going to pass the turn. And again, it had some counterplay too, where if you sniffed out your opponent had a refusal, you'd go, pre-combat, cast my creature, which you don't normally do. But if they wanted to counter your spell, they'd have to tap your things before combat, and you get in a cleaner hit, right? So all of that counterplay is really, really cool. And then the other side of the coin, you had the more aggressive Convoke payoff. Stuff like Shivan Branchburner, which is the 7-mana Convoke 4/4 flying haste creature. And I've been talking in the past few weeks about really thinking about how your cards are going to play out in game and how that might affect your drafting, your deck building decisions. Well, you know, I just talked about how great instant speed Convoke is. And you might look at a sorcery speed Convoke spell now and go like, oh, sorcery speed, I'm used to instants. But then you think, well, the great thing about instant speed Convoking is you can keep up blockers. But if you're playing an aggressive deck, you care a little bit less about keeping up a blocker, so you're okay tapping your creatures at sorcery speed to get a 4/4 hasty dragon on turn 5 or something like that. So just making that distinction between, am I an aggressive Convoke deck where I don't mind tapping my blockers, or am I in that more controlling deck where I don't want Shivan Branchburner because I just want to be sitting back on my instants? That, once again, has really made you think about how you're building your deck and what kind of cards you wanted. All right, next mechanic here. Let's talk about Incubate. So not too much to say about Incubate. I think it was, you know, a nice workhorse mechanic. It played out pretty nicely. I think the decision to make it able to activate it at instant speed was great. I think that added a lot of texture to the games. I think it would be, you know, usually sometimes they do limit these kind of things to only activated sorcery speed, but they did. I actually remember reading something that said they had that conversation. Should it be sorcery? Should it be instant? And they said, yeah, you know, it's kind of cooler if we can do this instant speed. I think that was true. It made you have stuff to do with your mana when you had other instants in your hand. Maybe those Convoke instants, maybe you had counter spells or card draw. You could instead wake up your Incubate tokens. That was really cool. And I think the lesson you can learn from Incubate, or just evaluating a mechanic like this, is at the beginning of the format, I remember a lot of people asking, ooh, Incubate seems kind of cool, but is it too slow? You know, something like Isaac Ataxius, where it's the 3 mana Incubate 3, draw a card. Is that too slow? And it's definitely good to be hesitant about a mechanic that is a little bit, invest now, get something later, right? Because a lot of modern day limited Magic asks you to do something right now. But the lesson is, if that thing that you're getting paid out on is more than you'd expect for the mana cost, then, it's okay to give up a little bit upfront or be a little more expensive upfront, right? For example, something like Completed Huntmaster, which, this wasn't an amazing card by any means, but I'm just using this as an example. 2 and a black for a 2/3, 1 tap, sacrifice another creature or artifact, incubate 3. Well, they couldn't make a card that was just like, sacrifice another creature, make a 3/3. That would be too powerful. But, giving it incubate 3 instead, yeah, that's a really good way to kind of balance that, because yes, you are having to invest in mana, having to wait, but the payoff you get is pretty good. And when for Isaac Ataxius, for example, like, you maybe had a turn where you're like, okay, I take a few damage here, but then I pass the turn with mana up the next turn, I'm keeping up this 3/3 incubate creature. And it often acted like threat of activation, right? Where it's just like, well, my opponent's got a bunch of 2/2s. They can't really attack into me because I threatened to activate this incubate token. And instead of activating, I instead cast my card draw spell or something. So we've had a few mechanics like that in the past where it's just like, well, is this too slow? And often, actually, I feel like the answer to that is no, it's not too slow. Again, it's that whole invest a little bit now and then get paid off big later. And I think generally those mechanics have panned out. I'm not saying it's always going to, but when you're evaluating a mechanic like that, I think you should generally put some stock in being like, you know what, as long as I'm getting paid out enough later, that's okay. I can invest a little bit here, take a bit of a hit on tempo, take a bit of a hit, maybe take a little bit of damage. Next up is backup. And backup, man, this is, I think, honestly, could be an evergreen mechanic. I mean, maybe there's not enough design space, but I thought backup was just phenomenal. Just like some of the other mechanics I talked about, it really asks you to think about what your next turn or two is going to like in combat. Do you want your Citadel Sentinel to be a 3/3? And you want that 3/3 to be able to attack next turn? Or do you want that upfront damage? Put it on your creature that can already attack, but then your Sigil Sentinel might not be able to get an attack in next turn, right? The Sigil Sentinel, by the way, is the 3 mana 2/2 Vigilance backup one. I thought that kind of puzzle you had to solve was pretty interesting. So not too much to say about backup. I just thought it was really cool. And once again, it did force you to think about how your turns are going to play out going forward. All right, and then the last mechanic here, those flip Phyrexians, the stuff like Aetherblade Agent, the 1/1 Death Touch, that 5 mana or 4 in a blue Phyrexian activated ability to transform it into a 3/3 Death Touch that when it hit your opponent or a battle, you draw a card, stuff like Blight Reaper Thallid. These cards, I think the main thing that the takeaway, and I heard this a lot when I asked people, hey, what did you learn about from this set? Is they said, it really made me evaluate what my opponent's mana could mean when they're holding it up. Because the whole thing with these flip Phyrexians is you didn't want to flip them into open mana, because if you paid that 4 mana, or even 3 mana on something like the Thallid, and your opponent had a Final Flourish, or they had a Forest Dispersal, you almost lost the game on the spot there a lot of times. It really did feel like. And it, once again, trained you to go, the opponent's got 4 mana, they've got 5 cards in hand. What does that mean? Why might they have done that? Why might they have passed the turn here? And again, this is just a skill you should be thinking about in all of your games. These force you to think about it, and especially if you got gotten by it a few times, you're like, oh wow, I really need to think about that next time. But these 4 cards force you to question, should I go for it here? It didn't just have you playing as, your own player. You were trying to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and think, why would they be doing the things they're doing? And from the opposite side too, it forced you to think, okay, well, they've got a Blight Reaper Thallid. I don't really want that thing to flip. Should I hold up my instant? Should I play my forward drop? I'm not sure. It really asks you to weigh those kind of things. So that counterplay or that interplay between you and your opponent, once again, something that you should be thinking about every single game. And going forward, if there's not, we're not going to see flip Phyrexians very often, I imagine. But there are going to be situations like when you have an equipment, right, and your opponent has open mana, they might be looking to blow you out on tempo where you invest 3 mana. Or when you have an aura, or just something face up especially, that's just like, they see it, the opponent sees it, and they know it's coming. Really just treat your opponent like a person that is a thinking person, and they're thinking just the same as you, how do I want to ambush my opponent, really foil their plans, and you should be thinking that too. And my final point here is I just want to highlight the cost of mana fixing, and this is something that kind of been brewing in my head as the set has been playing out, and just a concept that I think not everybody has really taken to heart. I think that, this set was a set that really asked you to splash in a lot of ways. There was a lot of really powerful cards at rare, and 3-color cards. And there was a decent amount of fixing in this set. There was the dual lands, there was stuff like Skittering Surveyor, Flywheel Racer, Blighted Burgeoning. And I think pretty quickly after the set came out, people realized that Skittering Surveyor, which was, the Dominaria All-Star, was pretty bad in this set. It was a cost, I think, to put Skittering Surveyor, this 3-mana 1/2, in your deck. Same with Flywheel Racer, right? The 2-mana vehicle. Not to say these cards are unplayable, but it was a cost associated with needing to, if you wanted to put that Borborygmos and Fibblethip in your deck, you had to put these kind of junky, clunky cards in your deck. And maybe that's worth it. You have to ask yourself, is the card I'm splashing for worth playing, my 23rd spell being something like a Flywheel Racer? Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But that question wasn't obvious all the time. And I do think that players that a little bit too late realized, oh, I shouldn't be third picking Skittering Surveyor, they suffered in their draft for that. And another thing just tied to fixing here that really was hammered home for me is that the difference between the 5-color fixing and the stuff that locked you in when you cast it. I had Neil Oliver on the podcast, about a month ago at this point. And this is one of the main points he really hammered home that I thought was just genius. Just the fact that something like Blighted Burgeoning, which is the tuna green enchantment that incubates 2, and you enchant your land, and that land taps for a mana of any color, plus it's, whatever it would naturally tap for. That is so much better when you're trying to cast multiple, sometimes you had 4 or 5 color decks. So much better than a Skittering Surveyor. Because Skittering Surveyor, that locks you in to, I gotta go get that black source, I've gotta go get that white source, then you draw your red card, and you're like, ugh, so awkward, right? Maybe you're even just splashing, just a 1 color with Skittering Surveyor, but then you have a double black card in your deck. You're like, well, I want to cast that Deadly Derision, but I also need to go get my red source, and I don't have that double black in my hand. What do I go get? So, just the value of a 5-color fixer, not only just in 4 or 5 color decks, but even in 3-color decks, I think is meaningfully better than something that locks you into the color once you cast it. And not to say, Skittering Surveyor has its upsides too. Yeah, you got a body you can sacrifice. I guess Blighted Burgeoning does as well. But, compare Skittering Surveyor to Flywheel Racer. That might be a better comparison, where it's like, you're getting a piece of cardboard with the Skittering Surveyor. That's not, I don't want to discount that. But you do also give something up in the process. So just really ask, what kind of fixing do you need in your deck? I think if you're just a 2-color deck, splashing one, a gold card, you're like a blue-red deck, splashing, a good blue-black card, a Halo Forger or something. Well, a dual land, a red-black dual land is going to be your best friend there. That's the most unintrusive fixing you can possibly have, right? And I think since there were so many variants of different kinds of fixing in the set, that lesson was really hammered home here. So I think that hopefully in future sets where there are going to be various kinds of fixing, really ask yourself, hey, am I a deck that needs to have a 5-color fixer? Or can I value a land a little bit higher? Because, the trade-off, of course, is the land, you don't have to pay mana for it, except for that, it comes in tapped. It's kind of quote-unquote a mana. Where the Blighted Burgeoning, the trade-off there is you have to pay a full 3 mana to unlock that. So really just, if you are splashing in any set really, ask yourself, what is that cost of the mana fixing? What am I investing to be able to play that powerful card? All right, and let's move into our community level ups here. So, first point here, and it's something that I held back on talking about because I knew that other people would definitely feel the same way, and this is such a huge talking point for this format. It's a big talking point for the podcast in general, but just how important gameplay is. 2 comments here, one from Unblinking Blood, they say how important it was to maximize your win rates, just have good gameplay in this set. Definitely had some decks that could have been trophies, but they played to worse records because there's so many gameplay decisions that you could just get wrong. And then my set review partner, Mark Anderson, who we will be having back on the podcast very soon, saying, echoing the same thing. And then, like I was saying, really push people to plan their turns out properly. And when you didn't ask the question, what could my opponent do next turn? That was so punishing because it wasn't just like, all right, it's turn 4, they'll play a 4-drop. It's, if I attack with this 1/1 and let my opponent flip their Invasion of Xerix, then that's really bad. Let's not attack for once. Hold back a blocker. And, this is, I've talked about this a lot lately, so I'm not going to go on and on and on about it. But in today's day and age of 17lands.com and data and so much good content out there these days, you can't get your edge anymore from just being a better drafter than anybody else. Because you're going to be in pods where everybody else knows what the good cards are, and your edge needs to be by being a better player, by being a better game player. So take that as you will. I've if you want some more insights on gameplay, I've definitely done a few episodes in the past few weeks. If you haven't checked those out before, so go check this out. I'm sure in the coming formats, I'm going to be hammering home gameplay as well. And in fact, one of the things that I usually do for formats is I have a specific gameplay episode. And for this format, for Mom, I actually moved that to like the second or third episode of the format. I think I'm going to be doing that going forward. I think I'm going to have just, state of the format episode, talking about just general format thoughts, and then week 2 or 3, right into gameplay, just so, the limited level ups listeners out there can start getting that edge before everybody else can. Next level up here, Grind was saying that they learned that it's a trap to read the spoiler and think, the set has so many playables, because they think every set has approximately the same number of playables, but because the bar for playable moves from format to format, it's kind of just like the cream of the crop rises to the top, right? If you're going to read the spoiler and think that every card is powerful, well, that means the bar is just going to be higher and you need to adjust accordingly. And I think that's very, very true. And the way this really plays out is don't hold on to your pre-set evaluations for too long. Once you play out the set, once you've drafted a few times, once the content starts to come out, that's when you can really learn, hey, this card that would be pretty good in most sets, a good example, I think, is just like, even something as simple as the War Slasher with the 4 mana, 3 in a red, 4/3 with Menace, that it double its power when you attack a battle. Like, 4 mana, 4/3 Menace, that's not a bad stat line. That card was close to unplayable in this set. Sure, there's the context of the removal's really good, so the expensive creatures needed to have ETBs, and if you didn't have that, you were just down on tempo, sure. But that concept applies, right? So be picky about your cards. I think that's really the level up you could take here. Just ask more of your cards. That's something I tend to just say for most formats, but don't be happy just playing like the kind of whatever filler playables. One of the things I was talking about on stream this week is when you're evaluating how good your deck is, you shouldn't just look at what are the top 5 cards in my deck or the top 8 cards. You should look at what the bottom 5 or 8 cards that are in your deck, because oftentimes I'll see people post their deck and be like, what happened here? I thought my deck was so good. And yeah, maybe they have an awesome deck. They've got like 3 Marshal Zhalfirs, a bunch of good knights, but they're also playing like Infected Defector and like Tiller of Flash. These cards that just are not very good as their cards 20, like 18 to 23. And when you draw one of those bad cards, all right, maybe you can overcome it. But if you ever draw 2 in a row, oh man, that's really, really bad. So yeah, I think be picky about your cards is the takeaway from that. What I hear from Abram, who also is on the podcast lately, he said one of the things he really learned is just how strong combat tricks can be, especially in this aerial boost and arachnoid adaptation too, the stronger tricks in the format. Yeah, like the thing about combat tricks is people tend to write them off a lot of the time. If you're a limited level ups listener and listening to me for a while, you'll know I love me a combat trick, a good one anyways. But I think people tend to look at combat tricks as like a lesser class of cards. This card that's like, yeah, you'll play a combat trick once in a while. But then when a good combat trick comes around, something like Aerial Boost or Arachnoid Adaptation, these extremely efficient combat tricks, don't just look at them as like, oh yeah, that's like a little bit better than your average trick. Aerial Boost, that's the best white common in my mind. That's the card you want 3 or 4 of in your white deck. So I think, a real takeaway here is have a keen eye for, that combat trick, that's way more efficiently costed than you usually get that. Arachnoid Adaptation, when I saw that card, I was like, that's a full mana off of how much that card usually costs. So keep your eye out for those good combat tricks. Not to say that all combat tricks are created equally. They're certainly not. But also don't treat them as second-class citizens, if you want to put it that way. Next lesson from Danelius. I thought this was a really, really good one. And I think, honestly, something I'm going to probably try to integrate into my content going forward. Danelius, by the way, Discord member, really does these deep dives on data. He spends a lot of time looking at just where cards are taken on average, their win rates, archetype win rates. He posts really good graphs and graphics in the Discord. So, if you want access to his stuff, come join the Discord, of course. But a very, kind of a data-minded question here, a data-minded lesson. One of the things that he noted is a lesson in this format was how to respond to the format's first metagame shift, the major metagame shift. This seems like it happens all the time, but when everyone is hearing and reading about how one deck is the best deck, there's a really good chance that it won't be the best deck for long. And, this is certainly something that I think is conscious in the mind of most players. It's like, sometimes it's called the LR effect, where it's like, well, Unlimited Resources says that blue-black's the best deck. Well, that actually, you're not going to be able to draft it, of course. But the thing I think I want to integrate into my content is really making it clear when that meta shift happens. And it usually happens about 2 weeks after the format's out. One, because, that's, I think, when people start to really listen to content. But a really important thing is quick draft starts after week 2. And when quick draft starts, a lot of the more intermediate players or beginners, they move away from the premier and best of 3 queues. And you do get a meta shift to people knowing what the good decks are. a lot of the quick draft players are newer players, and they'll maybe not be as in tune with the rest of the meta. And so I think it's really important. There was a point in the beginning of this format. I talked about how good blue-black was, but I don't think, as a content creator, I think I could have done a better job being like, actually, now blue-black's not that good, and I think blue-white's the best deck. So I think making a point of that, and for myself, but also for you as the drafter who is looking for getting that edge, don't always lock into, hey, this is the best deck, I'm going to draft for forever, because the best deck a lot of the time is kind of predicated on the fact that not everybody knows it's the best deck. You're getting Invasions of Amonkhet 5th or 6th pick. You're reeling Halo Forger sometimes. That never happens anymore, right? So definitely just being cognizant of the fact that meta games change, and it's a hard thing to grasp. I think if you're not looking at the 17 lands data, it's definitely something that's not, you feel the effects of it. You're like, oh wow, my blue-black decks aren't coming together, but you might not know where to go next. And again, I think it's where I can share some guidance. So both for me and for everybody else listening, I think it's a really good lesson. Next up from Jeremy Mai on Twitter, biggest takeaway was taking solid, albeit unspectacular, 2-drops over cards I initially ranked highly, like Phyrexian Gargantuan. Those early turns are so important. Also, tempo is so important, and I learned, once again, not to flip those flip Phyrexians into open mana. Yeah, I mean, this is something that's at the core of my being as a Magic player. I love cheap cards. Good cheap cards are so important, and they're so good. And, there's good expensive cards too. Don't get me wrong, but the bar for a expensive card for being a premium card is so much higher than a good 2-drop. I'm sure this isn't a surprise to most people, but you should really just put such a high premium on the good 1 and 2 and 3 drops. Your deck can't have too many of those. It really can't. It can't have too many, Aerialists, Skyclave Aerialists, and the Thalids, the Blight Reaper Thalids. It can certainly have too many Phyrexian Gargantuans, though. So, going forward, just put a high premium. If you're somebody who, goes, oh, that's an awesome 5-drop, awesome 6-drop. Yeah, those exist, but there's just only so much room for them. So those 2-drops, I'll take as many good 2-drops as I can get. Next up from Sean, aka TPO3 on Twitter, learned how and when to splash. And there's a lot of really powerful rares in this set, and sometimes they're not always worth splashing, no matter how enticing they look. Yeah, certainly. So there's 2 things going on here, right? I think one, sometimes the rare is just not as good as it might read. I think a rare that's not as good as it reads is Kurnoros and Kroxa, the Mardu Mythic. I mean, it's an okay card, certainly, but I found so much of the time when I cast that card, it was just like a big dummy, big old 6/6 Menace Vigilance. And that's not a bad card, but maybe you don't want to go out of your way for picking up a bunch of fixing, again, playing Skittering Surveyor to have to try to play that card. And especially if you're getting to the point where it's like a double color card, like a black card, that already has risk associated with, but you don't want to go out of your way for a black card that isn't even as good as you might have thought it was. So I think, this is a great takeaway too. And, of course, the other side of this, the second part is that I'm alluding to is, sometimes, the card's pretty good, but if you have to give up 4 picks for fixing to play that card, and instead you could be taking 4, maybe premium 2-drops or something, or 2 premium 2-drops, a removal spell, and something else, that might not be worth it to try to get that card in the deck. So, it's another card evaluation lesson, certainly, and one that you can't suss out before you play the set. It's more something that you should be cognizant of as you're playing the sets and really evaluating, hey, is that rare flashy and shiny? Or is it actually really good? I should actually be putting that card into my deck. Like Glissa. If it's a Glissa, of course you want to play that card. So just be judicious is the way I would put it when you're splashing. Next from Tech from Twitter, don't trust R&D, meaning that the headliner mechanic isn't always going to be the most powerful thing in a set or even matter that much. Yeah, this is a really interesting point. So I think even on a previous Lessons Learned episode from a few years back, I actually said the opposite of this. I said, R&D's had a really good track record lately with their headliner mechanic, you know? And then in the last year or two, we've had quite a few sets that are just like, you know, Midnight Hunt with werewolves. That didn't pan out. And D&D AFR with Venture. That wasn't so good, you know? So, you know, battles, I think, kind of, this is what they're alluding to, where battles aren't just home runs across the board. You know, I don't exactly want to get into speculating to why this might be the case. Maybe it is the fact that, you know, sets are just more complex. There's more stuff going on, and they need to balance for Commander, Standard, older formats, Limited. It's just really hard to balance. But, yeah, and, you know, going forward with Lord of the Rings, the main set mechanic is the tempted by the ring, right? You have the ring, and, you know, I'm not going to get into exactly what it is, but it's the headliner mechanic, and that might not be awesome. I totally agree here, especially, like, you know, the track record in the last year or two. I'm going to be a bit more skeptical before just going, yeah, this is going to be good. You know, I trust R&D, because not that I don't trust R&D. They do great work. This isn't, like, a giant criticism on them. It's just, like, you know, don't blindly just be like, yeah, this must be good, especially on a mechanic that doesn't read so well. Like, I think in the past, sometimes I've gone, like, this doesn't read that well, but R&D probably knows what they're doing. And they do. I really do think they do. But they might not be optimizing that mechanic for Limited. You know what I mean? So, yeah, just, again, I feel like a lot of these lessons have just been like, be judicious. And I think that's what this one really boils down to as well. Next up from Chris Henderson from Twitter. Not an absolute, but don't draft a worse color pair just because it's more open. Sometimes it's better to go for the more powerful deck, even if you have to fight for it, because you still end up with a better deck. The rewards in Magic are top heavy, so go for gold, not silver. Yeah, I think this is fantastic. This is a level up that I had, you know, I think around Shadows over Innistrad back in the day when it was originally out, not the remaster. I remember I felt like I was getting put into red-white so much of the time in that set, and red-white was horrendous. I'm like, oh, I'm drafting the open color, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but like, you know, the idea of drafting, you know, the open color, the open lane is you get a good deck, you get the best deck you possibly can get. Sometimes an open red-white lane or whatever it is not better than a blue lane, a blue X lane in this set that isn't as open. You're fighting with 3 people, because a deck with 8 good blue cards is going to be just great on its own. So yeah, I really do feel this, you know, part of this is draft gets romanticized sometimes a little bit, where it's like, if you just read the open colors, you're gonna get paid off. I believe that to be true in some regards, but it's not absolute, like Chris is saying here. So I would just really try to have a good sense of how good the best color is, because if you're in a set like this where blue is far and away the best color, yeah, like you pick up 2 Preen champions, I really want to play blue because of those. Don't give them up too easily. Don't settle for a tier 2 deck. Even if you think, you know, I wield a card or 2 here and there. One of the things for this that I've noticed, and this is, you know, definitely related to this point, is when you have, you've started blue, and maybe you feel like it's getting a little bit cut. Well, everybody else at the table is probably feeling that too. And because everybody kind of has this scramble, it's kind of like a game of chicken, where it's like, all right, everybody tries to get into blue in the first pack, and then everybody gets out of it because nobody can get into it. It actually ends up being open in pack 3 a lot of the time, right? So that's another reason, I think, to kind of have some, you know, have just strong will and be like, you know, if I have reasons to draft this good color, let me hold on to them. And I actually think you get more rewarded than not. Like, sometimes, yes, the can go haywire, can be like, oh, I'm holding on for dear life, and I never see any good blue cards. But even if you're seeing like a good, like 4 good blue cards been in the pack 1, when in a set that color, the best color, is as strong as blue is in this set, I think that's good enough to hang on. So gonna be some push and pull, but you know, just don't get caught up in like, well, I drafted the open deck, when that open deck might not have actually been the best deck for your seed. It might not end up with the best final result. And then last here, from Andrew Gill, I love this. This is one I really like ending on. Don't miss the forest for the trees. If you're still focused on pick orders and other minutia, it can cause you to miss higher level trends. Stated another way, don't forget the fundamentals while going deep. Yeah, I love that so much. That is so true. You know, just a few episodes ago, we had the core, the deck building fundamentals episode, and so much of the core of that episode is what Andrew's saying here. You know, and this ties to not just deck building, but your drafting and your gameplay too. You're gonna hear a lot from content creators, or just, you know, your own experiences of, this is what you should do, or this is what's good, or, you know, just like whatever, some piece of information. You know, maybe a content creator is talking about their pet deck for a certain reason. They're like, oh, I really liked this deck, or a pet card even, and it gets you excited to try it out. And you jump into the draft, and maybe you drafted that deck, but it just didn't it kind of was a good version, but you didn't have enough 2-drops and you didn't have enough removal, and the deck just didn't work. It didn't function. And where that person who was talking about that deck who they had a good experience with, well, maybe they knew to get into that deck. They know the times to get into it and not to. They know, well, I should only get into that deck when the colors are somewhat open and I pick up enough 2-drops and that kind of thing, right? I think if you're looking for long-term Magic success, this is something I truly believe. Reed Duke is another person who's a big champion of this. Fundamentals. And that's what I try to teach on the show, right? That's what I try to really focus on. There's definitely, you can go deep. You can get lost in the sauce sometimes. But if you really at that same time want to make sure all your draft, deck building, and gameplay fundamentals are still sound if you're going off the deep end. And that's it. Thank you so much for being here for this format. This was a great format. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Got a new format on the horizon, like I mentioned before. A little bit of a content schedule for those interested. So this is going out on Wednesday night. Next week, Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to be doing the set review, common and uncommon, and rare and mythic set review with Mark Anderson, my set review partner, on my stream live. Of course, it's going to be posted to the podcast feed and to the YouTube. And then on Thursday, there's the streamer early access event if you want to tune into that. And then on Friday, or maybe the weekend there, I'm going to be putting out my set overview episode, which is kind of like, the condensed set review, talking about what the set's all about, the important stuff in the set. And I'm going to have a little bit of experience too, since I will have played it during the early access. Anyways, thank you so much, everybody, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.